In view of the ongoing
because you are the people who are in the front line and learning things much more easier than many of us who are sitting and listening to you and interacting with you. So it's a great opportunity for us to learn as well as for you to interact with us. And shall we start now?
Yes, I'll start.
Share screen.
Uh, so I'm presenting a case of a 9-year-old male child,
Just
resident
a
of.
minute. Share screen. Are we seeing on the screen or just no screen?
Actually, sir, if you start the video, there becomes an issue with the audio.
Okay, so
because,
we don't have a screen display at all, just the audio.
No, yes, only audio.
Okay, fine. Then start.
Yes, sir. I'm presenting a case of a 9-year-old male child, resident
Yes.
of Mumbai,
Yeah.
known case of end-stage renal disease, undergoing peritoneal dialysis, asymptomatic at present, has come for routine follow. Informant is mother.
Yeah.
So I would like to date back my history to 4 years back, when
Yes.
patient was around 5 years old.
Yes.
At that time, mother noticed child passing dark-colored urine.
Dark-colored urine.
Yes.
Okay.
He also developed swelling over the face and lower limb over the next 24 hours.
Yes.
Was taken to a hospital. At
Yes.
that time, he was diagnosed to have hypertension.
Yes.
Mother doesn't remember the BP reading and
Yes.
was also told to have increased serum creatinine.
Yes.
The exact values of the creatinine not remembered.
Right.
In the hospital, patient developed a fall in urine output and also
Yes.
had breathlessness.
Yes.
At this time, there was no history of fever.
Yes.
No history of rash over the body,
Yes.
no history of diarrhea, no history of pain in abdomen,
Yes.
no history of seizure or altered sensoria.
Yes.
In view of drop in urine output and raised creatinine with hypertension, he was
Yes.
advised to undergo kidney biopsy.
Right.
However, initially, his stabilization done with hemodialysis through right IJV catheter.
Yeah.
Also, multiple blood and platelet transfusions were done at the time.
Yes.
Underwent kidney biopsy under general anesthesia, which was
So
uneventful.
I presume, let me just interrupt you there. I presume the kidney size was normal.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Post biopsy, patient was started on plasmapheresis.
Yes.
Mother does not remember any other injectable medicines being given.
Yes.
After 6 to 7 sessions of hemodialysis, his urine output slightly picked up.
Yes.
Dialysis was stopped.
Yes.
However, plasmapheresis was continued for almost 2 months.
Yes.
Initially,
2 months. How often?
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Yes.
Initially daily for 21 days.
Yes.
Then thrice a week for 2 to 3 weeks.
Yes.
And then twice a week for the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yes.
He was discharged approximately 1 month after admission.
Right.
At the time of discharge, he had persistently raised BP and increased serum creatinine.
Yes.
He was also explained about need for dialysis in the future.
Right.
In view of this, peritoneal dialysis catheter was inserted under general anesthesia.
Right.
Procedure was told to be uneventful to the mother.
Yes.
Over the next 5 to 6 months, patient was routinely following up in the OPD.
Yes.
However, he had persistently raised BP. He was on, in spite of being on 2 or 3 antihypertensives. Patient gradually developed symptoms of uremia. He had nausea, decreased appetite, along with episodes of vomiting.
Yes.
In view of this,
this was on peritoneal dialysis.
No, sir. This is prior to starting, sir.
Prior to starting. Okay.
Yes,
PD catheter.
Initially, they had inserted the PD catheter, but they have not yet started.
Yes.
Mother was explained that he will require dialysis in the future.
Yes.
Then, in view of these symptoms, he was advised to start CAPD.
Yes.
Mother received training regarding handling of the peritoneal dialysis catheter and bags.
Yes.
Was started on CAPD around 6 months after the initial episodes.
Yes.
Initially was given 3 exchanges per day. Later changed to 4 exchanges per day around 1 month later.
Yes.
Dwell volume was less initially, and it was increased gradually. Mother doesn't remember the exact values. Since the last 3 years, patient is on the same prescription.
Yes.
He is receiving peritoneal CAPD at present 1.5% dextrose, two sittings in the day with 1000 ml exchange in each, and 2.5% dextrose at night with 1000 ml exchange in each.
So altogether he is getting how much dual volume?
Sir, 4 liters.
4 liter. Okay.
Yes. His urine out at the onset of initiation of peritoneal dialysis, his urine output was around 200 ml per day.
Yeah.
Which decreased gradually.
What was his weight and height?
Sir, at that time, I don't have the weight and height, sir. Currently, sir, weight is 18.5 kg and height is 115 centimeters. Both are less than third centile, sir, for age.
Third centile, less than third centile.
Yes.
Yeah.
At present, ultrafiltration of the urine output decreased to 0, sir, around 1 year after initiation of PD.
Yes.
And at present, he's passing no urine.
Yes.
Ultrafiltrate of around 600 to 700 ml per day.
Yes.
A year back, patient had fever, vomiting, loose motions, and abdominal pain, along with cloudy effluent.
Yeah, peritonitis.
Yes, sir. He was diagnosed with peritonitis. At that time, mother remembers that 2 intraperitoneal antibiotics were given at home.
Yes.
No IV antibiotics were given.
Yes.
Antibiotics, according to the mother, were given once a day in a single exchange, sir. At that time, there was no change in PD prescription.
Yes.
Mother denies any breach in sterility or change in the caregiver.
Yes.
There was no history of any constipation. Sir, symptoms resolved after around 3 weeks of antibiotic therapy.
Yes.
He had a similar episode, sir, 2 months later.
Yes.
Again at that time.
So this is after complete resolution, 2 months later, he had another episode.
He had another episode of peritonitis, sir. Again treated with 2 intraperitoneal antibiotics. This time they were given for 14 days. Since then, patient is asymptomatic, undergoing daily peritoneal dialysis. Mother is doing the peritoneal dialysis. There is no history of non-compliance with PD prescription.
Right.
He is currently on 2 antihypertensive drugs, along with once a week EPO injection and once a month iron injection. BP is well controlled according to mother at present.
Yes.
There is no history of any pericatheter leak or discharge.
Yes.
There are no flow issues on peritoneal dialysis.
Yes.
There is no history of fever or abdominal pain at present. No history of swelling over the face or legs. And there is no history of constipation.
Right. So, Parth, can I just, you have given an excellent description.
So actually, some history is remaining, sir. Can I?
Yes,
finish?
tell me.
He has been advised to undergo transplant around 6 months back. Prior to, after start of worker, he underwent some genetic testing.
Yes.
Which showed some mutation according to the mother. Following that, both parents were also evaluated, and they also were found to have some genetic mutation.
Yes.
Hence, patient's grandmother now has come forward as a donor.
Yes.
She's 65-year-old, has no associated comorbidity.
Yes.
Her genetic testing has not been done as of now.
Right.
The birth history is
grandmother, maternal grandmother or paternal grandmother?
Maternal grandmother.
Okay.
Sir, birth history, the patient was born of a non-consanguineous marriage.
Yes.
Birth weight was around 2.4 kg at birth.
Yes.
No complications during pregnancy or at the time of delivery. It was a full-term normal vaginal delivery.
Right.
Patient has been immunized till the age of 5 years.
Yes.
As per the universal guidelines.
Yes.
He received 3 doses of hepatitis B since starting dialysis.
Yes.
And also has received 2 doses of pneumococcal vaccine.
Great.
His developmental history is comparable to peers. Only his height is less as per height and weight is less as per the mother.
Yes.
He's being spooled at home by his mother.
Yes.
And he plays with children of his age, and he's otherwise sharp and intelligent.
Right.
And dietary history has a caloric intake of around 1300 to 1400 kilocalorie per day.
Yes.
And family history is the only child.
Yes.
Mother and father have no history of any kidney disease or hypertension or diabetes.
Yes.
But as sir previously mentioned, both have undergone some genetic testing
Yes.
and have some mutations. Both
Yes.
of them.
Okay.
Sir, I'll summarize.
Yes, please.
Sir, he's a case of he's a 9-year-old male who had a history of nephritic syndrome
Yes.
and acute kidney injury. Required plasmapheresis and dialysis initially. There
Yes.
was some recovery.
Yes.
After 6 months, he was started on CAPD.
Yes.
Currently, he undergoes 4 exchanges, 1.5% dextrose into 2 in the day, and
Yes.
2.5% dextrose into 2 at night.
Right.
He has had 2 episodes of peritonitis.
Yes.
Otherwise, PD course has been uneventful, and he has some genetic underlying mutation.
Now, shall we see? I just want to start with we have issues are one, he had a glomerulonephritis. You said a nephritic picture in a young chap who had a kidney biopsy done, and plasmapheresis was given as a treatment to him, which to a certain extent helped him for a short while, but he reached end-stage renal failure. So I have my pathology colleague here, and she will just talk about what is the disease or what are the types of diseases which requires plasmapheresis, and what is the glomerulonephritis which will require plasmapheresis. Priyanka, can you just tell? Yeah, come, take your mask. 1 second. Yeah. So, Parth, do you think this child had some sort of a typical HUS?
Yes, sir. That is how he has presented, sir. And with the genetic mutation confirmed, sir, I would like to keep my diagnosis as a typical HUS.
Yes.
What was the genetic mutation?
Actually, ma'am, I didn't see the report. The mother was unaware of exact reports, ma'am.
So the question is whether it is a factor H deficiency or any other secondary atypical HUS, the child. So we do not know the diagnosis. But do you know what was a histological picture and what did it show?
Actually, no, sir. I only saw the patient clinically. I did not see the reports prior reports. Biopsy report, mother was unaware, sir. She only remembered that after the biopsy, he was started on plasmapheresis.
Yeah. So Dr. Priyanka, who is a nephropathologist, will just talk to you a little bit about a picture which will be seen in the 4 compartments of the kidney. That is the blood vessel compartment, the glomerular compartment, the tubular compartment, and the interstitial compartment in a patient with HUS. Priyanka, just say.
Usually an HUS will present as a thrombotic microangiopathy picture.
Excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am,
we are not able to hear.
Pardon?
Sir, we are not able to hear, madam. I think.
An HUS, how does an HUS present?
Hello?
Hello, how does an HUS present? The HUS will present like a thrombotic microangiopathy.
Yes, ma'am.
So, what are the features of thrombotic microangiopathy in a renal biopsy?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, there is widening of the subendothelial space and microvascular thrombosis, ma'am, which are characteristic in thrombotic microangiopathy.
Okay, but where exactly? Like, if you can even also see in the glomerulus as well as in the blood vessels.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. In the glomerular capillaries and also the blood vessels.
Okay, so any idea if this patient had a renal biopsy earlier showing a TMA kind of a picture?
No, ma'am. Actually, we don't have the report. Only thing the mother said that after the biopsy, patient was started on plasmapheresis.
Okay. So it suggests that there is HUS, which is probably an atypical HUS because there is no history of diarrhea or things like that in a child. Yes. So it is an atypical HUS. One of the most important causes is factor H deficiency. Even
Yes.
though we say that we need to look at the genetic study, there is no uniform genetic involvement or genetic factors which are involved in atypical HUS or in factor H deficiency. I will just hand over the discussion to Dr. Rajiva, who can say a few words or make a few comments. Louder. Louder.
Can you hear me?
No, ma'am. Actually, we are not able to hear you properly.
Hi, Pat. This is Rajiva here. Can you hear me?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. Actually, very faint voice.
Okay. Now?
Ma'am, can you get closer? The sir's mic is really clear, but I think.
Yeah, can you hear me, Pat, now?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am. Yes. Now.
Okay. Okay. So so a nice presentation, firstly. This is a 9-year-old boy who was diagnosed at around 4 years of age, right? According
Yes,
to the
ma'am.
history.
Yes.
Now, in that age group, what are your differential diagnoses of glomerulonephritis at 4 years of age?
Ma'am, at 4 years of age, I would like to think of a post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis.
Okay, very good.
Then a TMA like picture, ma'am, like this kid has, like this child has presented. IgA with crescentic nephropathy.
Yeah.
And other thing is the multisystemic disorder like a lupus nephritis, ma'am. But
A little
without
rare, I think, at 4 years of age
I would
in
like to
this
keep
child.
it down, ma'am.
Okay.
And other thing is an C3 glomerulonephritis.
Okay, that's one more thing we have to keep in mind. C3 glomerulonephritis, even in the background of a kind of plasmapheresis and all that, because even that is associated with the the complement pathway deficiencies, right?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, C3 glomerulonephritis, what is the most common among the like the MPGN sort of presentation?
Yes,
What
ma'am.
is more common in this age group, 4 years of age?
C3 glomerulonephritis can be seen, ma'am.
Okay, isn't dense deposit disease a little more common when they are that young?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is there you said the child underwent plasmapheresis?
Yes, ma'am.
So, so in this plasma, was there any other sort of immunosuppression given at that point?
No, ma'am. As I mentioned in the history, mother does not remember any other injectable medicine given, and at the time of discharge also, he was discharged only on antihypertensive, no other medicines.
And do you recall any study from India which was published in KI regarding atypical HUS?
No, ma'am. I'm not aware of.
So there was a paper from AIIMS which was done I want to say 2012, which was published in Kidney International. So the most common, what do you think is the most common cause of atypical HUS in India?
Ma'am, factor H mutation.
The more common is anti-factor H antibodies.
Okay.
So that paper was one of the Indian papers where a whole lot of people contributed to it, from children giving, having HUS. So now you talked about the history of diarrhea. So is there any overlap between D plus HUS and D minus HUS?
Yes, ma'am. What has been observed that in some patients with D plus HUS, if they undergo transplant, later they develop a recurrence of TMM, and after genetic mutations were done in those patients, they found that there were some genetic testing was done. They found some genetic mutations in those patients also.
Okay, so you're not asking.
Yeah, so that is something very relevant at this point in time. So the next question is, I just wondered, because the pathologist is sitting here,
yes,
is there any role for having had an electron microscopy of the kidney done at that time when they did the biopsy? I know in Bombay they do a lot of electron microscopic picture. So is there any role? Would you think that is there any role? Because I'm requesting my pathology colleague to comment on that. What do you think that? Is there any role?
Sir, it can be diagnosed on a light microscopy also, but electron microscopy also show the characteristic lesions of swelling and detachment of the endothelial cells.
Priyanka, can you just talk on that louder?
And the intraluminal the blood in the intraluminal vessels can also be seen better.
Okay, what are the differential diagnoses for hereditary glomerulonephritis?
Sorry, ma'am, I can't
What
hear.
was the differential diagnosis?
Yes, ma'am.
What were your differential diagnoses in this particular case?
Ma'am, I had kept a differential diagnosis of us for TMS, C3 glomerulonephritis, IJ with crescent, and post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis.
The child was only 4 years old. So what were the other hereditary diseases that you would have thought of?
Hereditary disease, ma'am, at this age.
Alports doesn't present at this age, if I understand clearly. Alports come in the later decades of life.
Later, second or third decade.
Yes, correct, Parth. You are quite right. So, are there any other hereditary diseases which we are missing, which we need to think about in this particular scenario?
Other work are congenital FSGS, but
yes.
Sir, it will not present like this, sir. It will present with more of a nephrotic syndrome like
Correct.
Parth, I have a question.
Yes, this is Rajiv asking. Introduce
yes.
Yes.
So what are the main pathological as well as clinical differences between dense deposit disease and C3GN?
Ma'am, dense deposit disease is a subtype of C3GN where there is osmophilic transformation of the basement membrane. It is seen on the electron microscopy.
Okay. What are the clinical differences that you can have between the two groups? In terms of what you can find in the blood, you want to measure anything in the blood, which will be more in DDD versus C3GN? C3 nephritic factor, have you heard of that?
Yes, ma'am. C3 nephritic factor.
C3 factors will be very, very high in DDD. When these are subtle differences, they can overlap quite a bit. But basically,
yes,
and what other thing will you have in terms of when you look at the physical appearance in dense deposit disease?
Ma'am, there will be a lobular type of glomerulonephritis. There will be proliferation of the endothelial and as well as the mesangial cells.
And in C3GN has a wide variety of presentations, whereas dense deposit disease, Priyanka can elaborate, will have dense deposits in the
in the sub. Hello.
Yes.
Sir, it will have dense deposit in the subendothelium as well as the mesangial region.
Yeah, good. And one more thing is, what about in C3GN? What are the different presentations it can have in histology?
Histologically, morphologically. Other
C3GN will have mostly a membranoproliferative type of glomerulonephritis.
Correct.
Okay, but even dense deposit disease also can have the same. What about in the IF? The immunofluorescence for both?
I don't know the exact difference.
Priyanka, can you explain, please?
Now, in dense deposit disease, it's usually the dense deposition that you can see in the subendothelium. So it have like a sausage kind of like an appearance in immunofluorescence in C3. Whereas in CGN alone, if it was either infection related or otherwise, it can have also like a garland kind of a proper membranoproliferative where you can even see subendothelial deposits or subepithelial deposits or even the mesangial deposits. So that's one thing, but yes, EM is actually the diagnostic feature for differentiating between the two. EM is actually the diagnostic, but these are some small subtle differences which we can see even in immunofluorescence, basically.
So Parth, that's the reason why you brought in the role of EM, so that we need to also look forward, rather than being in a well, we have to come out of the well and think about that. So, yes. Parth, do you want to discuss anything more on the histology or the basic kidney diagnosis, or shall we move forward now?
Yes, sir, we can move forward.
Rajiva wants to make one more comment.
So, yes. On physical examination, what is classical of dense deposit disease?
Sorry, ma'am. Hello.
The retina.
The retina will have the Drasen's.
Yeah. And physical examination wise, one of the things which you can see when a child has dense deposit disease?
They will have.
partial lipodystrophy is
Yes,
quite
sir.
common when
Lipodystrophy.
you have dense
Acquired
lipoproteins
partial
and not
lipodystrophy.
T3GM. Yeah.
Okay, so far so good. So let's move forward. The child reached end-stage renal failure in spite of giving recurrent plasmapheresis.
Yes.
And then patient was started on peritoneal dialysis. Now let me ask you, in a child who is 4 to 9 years old, what would be the best renal replacement therapy?
Sir, the best renal replacement therapy will be a transplant.
Very good. That is what every physician, every nephrologist and pediatrician and the parent will be looking forward to. But it may not be possible in every child because we had to do intensive investigation like the genetic studies you have done and to see that whether the disease will recur in the allograft within a short period of time. Let me just ask you, what are the diseases which can recur in the allograft within a short period of time after transplant in a child?
Yes, sir. The diseases that can recur are, sir, FSGS, which is not hereditary.
Correct. Very good.
Then the other diseases are like atypical HUS, which has a very high rate of recurrence.
Correct.
Sir, then there is oxalosis,
yes,
which has a recurrent rate of almost 100%.
Yes, very good. Then,
and sir, IgA nephropathy also can recur.
Yes, yes. IgA nephropathy. Then,
histologic recurrence of almost 60% in IgA nephropathy, but graft loss is less.
Correct. Very
and
good.
other diseases like anti-GBM, if it is rare in children, but if has a native kidney disease due to anti-GBM, it can also recur.
Yes. So these are the considerations you will have when you talk to the parents and to the other caregivers when you talk about transfer. So now we moved on. Let's say that hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. What would you prefer as a nephrologist, as a renal replacement therapy at this point in time?
Sir, in children, sir, peritoneal dialysis will be better than hemodialysis.
Why do you think so?
Sir, there is less incidence of secondary hyperparathyroidism with peritoneal dialysis, sir, compared
Anything
to
else? Any other advantages?
Sir, less number of hospital visits.
Yes, very good.
Schooling is less affected, sir, as compared to hemodialysis.
Right.
And the mother, the family is involved in care, in giving care to the child.
Yes.
So.
And then access creation is a very difficult thing in young children. Access is one of the most important things. To create a fistula is a very difficult thing in a child.
Yes.
And then the other advantages are better blood pressure control because they get 24 hours dialysis. And next is that how about
better growth, sir, on
correct. Better growth on parent. Suppose I asked you that question and you very clearly said that there is growth retardation in this particular child. So what are the strategies you have in a child with growth retardation to improve the growth?
Sir, first of all, we'll have to see whether he's been adequately dialyzed.
Good.
We'll have to see the KT by V, whether he's compliant with the dialysis prescription.
Yes.
Sir, other thing we have to look at is the nutritional
very good.
intake.
Let me just ask you. As the child is on peritoneal dialysis, and what should be the protein? How much protein? How many kilocalories they should get?
Sir, protein requirement in children up to 3 years of age is around 2.5 to 3 gram per kg.
Yes.
From 3 to 12 years, it is around 2 to 2.5 gram per kg.
Yes, correct.
And in adolescent, it is around 1.5 gram per kg.
Okay, so what should be the calories? How many calories should they be receiving?
Sir, caloric requirement in children up to the age of for that, this is for standard weight for age, sir.
Yes.
Up to 10 kg, it is 100 kilocalorie per kg.
Yes.
From 10 to 20 kg, it is 1000 plus 50 kilocalorie per kg.
Yes.
And from 20 to 30 kg, it is 1500 plus 20 kilocalorie per kg about 20.
Yes. So so nutrition is one of the most important things. A pediatric nephrologist or a child undergoing dialysis, hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis, the requirements are different. And salt restriction is because children always would like to have something with the salt, like, chips and other things. So salt restriction is also important. But the advantages of peritoneal dialysis are there is continuous removal of salt and water. So the blood pressure control will be much better in a PD patient who is taking a liberal diet with salt.
Yes. Dietary restriction will also be less, sir, on peritoneal dialysis as compared to
also they should receive all the microelements and macroelements.
Yes.
And one more thing, I just wondered, in this aspect, you should also make comment on erythropoietin usage and also what is the other hormone you would give to this child for enhancing the growth.
I would like to use recombinant human growth hormone.
Good. Okay.
After seeing that all the other parameters are okay, sir, like adequacy of dialysis and nutrition, the next option is recombinant human growth hormone, sir. Dose of 0.05 unit per kg per day, sir, subcutaneous.
Yes. And also erythropoietin
yes, sir. He's on
for the anemia. Right?
Yes, sir. He's on once a week erythropoietin.
Right. And also, is he a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian? Dietary preferences are very important.
Yes.
And to know that, because the diet has to be given in such a way depending upon their likes and dislikes. Is this child a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian?
He is primarily vegetarian, sir.
Right.
Once a month they have some non-veg.
So that adds more responsibility to provide him enough protein. And when you provide him enough protein, 50% of that should be of high biological value.
Yes, sir.
If you give 1 gram of protein, 500 milligrams should be of high biological value.
Yes.
Right. So the growth is very important, and also adequacy of dialysis is important. Nutrition is important, and also the other things which you would like, immunization. You mentioned in your presentation that child was given hepatitis B vaccination and antibody levels were checked after that. Is it important to check it?
Yes, sir, it is important, but mother doesn't remember, sir.
Okay, so it is important to check it because up to 65 to 75% of patients may only show anti-HBs antibody in appropriate titers, but they may still have protective effect if you have given the appropriate vaccination for hepatitis B.
Yes.
Right. Now, the next thing which we want to discuss is regarding the education. Is the child being educated at home, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, let us go to peritoneal dialysis now. The child had issues with peritoneal dialysis. There were 2 episodes of peritonitis, one after the other.
Yes, sir.
And both were successfully treated.
Yes, sir.
So the questions are, when you have a patient who is presenting with peritonitis, now what are the things, peritoneal dialysis catheter related infections, what are the things you would observe and look at to advise the parents regarding the peritoneal dialysis practice?
Yes, sir. I would like to observe the caregiver giving a session of peritoneal dialysis to the patient.
Yes.
To see whether
how they are giving it. Right.
Yes, sir. To see whether aseptic precautions are being followed.
Right.
Sir, other thing is where the peritoneal dialysis is being given.
Yes.
Whether it is being given at home or anywhere else.
Yes.
Then other.
Would you? I just want to interrupt there. Would you, if the dialysis is being conducted in the room, would you like to have a fan or no fan? Ceiling fan?
Sir, a ceiling fan and AC are supposed to be stopped before starting peritoneal dialysis.
Definitely.
The room is.
There should not be a fan at all. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Move on.
Sir, other thing I would like to see is whether the peritoneal dialysis catheter is being properly covered while the patient is not on dialysis.
Yeah, because you know the exit site care is one of the most important things.
Exit site care, yes, sir.
Because you have to look at exit site in every peritonitis to document whether there is an exit site infection, and also to palpate the tunnel of the catheter to look for whether there is a tunnel infection.
Yes, sir.
And the other thing I just wanted to ask you was, do you think that the child should have an anterior nares culture, or the person who is doing the dialysis should have an anterior nares culture done?
Sorry, sir, I didn't get the question.
No, the nasal culture, nose culture for Staph aureus carrier state.
Yes, sir. In children, it has not been documented to be beneficial, sir. Giving rifampicin for clearance of
no, culture. I'm just talking about, is it necessary to do a culture?
Yes, sir. Yes.
We had 2 episodes of peritonitis with
yes, sir. It is necessary to do a
Yes, it is necessary. Both the child as well as the
caregiver.
So, other than giving rifampicin, what are the other strategies you can undertake regarding nasal carriage of Staphylococcus in preventing peritonitis? You said the rifampicin you don't want to give. What are the other strategies you can do?
Sir, I'm not aware, sir.
Okay. So the other thing is mupirocin ointment administration in the anterior, in the nose.
Yes.
Of the child as well as the caregiver.
Yes, sir. Mupirocin.
Okay. Mupirocin ointment. And the other issue is that see how the procedure is being done by the mother or the caregiver. Yes. It is very important because there could be other people doing the dialysis when the mother is not available. So any person who is not trained by you or your facility should not be doing peritoneal dialysis.
Yes, sir.
So that is very important when they come to the hospital to find out from the parents that is there any other caregiver in between who has done the peritoneal dialysis, which has led to break in the system, in the sterile system, leading to peritonitis.
Okay. I asked the mother, sir. She denied that history actually.
Right. So the exit site was normal, and there was no issue with the tunnel, but still the child developed a peritonitis. Now the next question coming is, was there any preceding diarrhea before the onset of peritonitis, or was there any preceding long-term constipation?
No, sir. Constipation was not there, and diarrhea was also not there.
Right. Yes. So the child was eating well. Child did not have any invasive procedures done prior to the peritonitis,
no,
right?
No, sir.
Like a colonoscopy and things like that.
No, sir. Nothing like that.
Right. And tooth extraction is also important.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are the things you would like to, and let me just tell you. So 2 episodes of peritonitis were successfully treated. So this suggests what are the most important organisms which produce peritonitis generally in our country. I want you to look in our country, because there are a number of publications in our country, both in adults and children, about peritonitis.
Yes, sir. Most common will be, sir, Staph aureus, sir.
Staph aureus, or is it Staph epidermidis, or are there gram-negative organisms also?
Sir, most common will be with gram-positive, sir. And cons and Staph aureus.
Adult population, it was shown, it was published in our, I was the first author in that. And there is also regional variation in some centers, especially in Lucknow Sanjay Gandhi Institute. They had relatively more gram-negative compared to gram-positive. So we may also have to look at the regional differences and the center which is involved in treating peritonitis to see what percentage of them do have a culture-positive peritonitis and what percentage should have a culture-negative peritonitis. It is important to know that to tailor the treatment.
Yes, sir. Actually, sir, according to the ISPD guidelines, sir, latest guidelines, they have said that the culture-negative peritonitis rate should be less than 15%.
Yes, 18%. There should be 15 to 18%. Yes.
Yes. Otherwise, we'll have to reassess the way the culture is being done.
Right. But in our country, unfortunately, we have, when we did the study, much more larger percentage had culture negative peritonitis. When you
Okay.
have a culture negative peritonitis, what are
Yes,
the
sir.
differential diagnoses you would entertain in these patients?
Sir, culture negative peritonitis, we'll have to see whether it is a partially treated peritonitis which was not picked up on culture.
Right.
Other thing is we will have to see for fastidious organisms, sir.
Yes.
Then other thing is in our country said tuberculous peritonitis.
Very good.
And fungal peritonitis.
Yes, because children, we have 18% of the world population in India and 25% of the tuberculosis in this country globally.
Yes.
So children, one should not overlook the possibility of TB peritonitis.
Yes.
Right, very good. So now the peritonitis were treated. So what are the different, when you look at peritonitis, you want to use common terms. What are the terms you would like to use? Because Rajiva will tell you about that. Can you just explain to us or just tell us what are the different types of peritonitis? We said gram positive, gram negative, culture negative, tuberculous, and then bowel leak. And so what are the other uses or terms you are used in classifying peritonitis?
Sir, other terms used are, sir, recurrent
Very
peritonitis.
Good. What is recurrent peritonitis?
Recurrent peritonitis is, sir, peritonitis with the same organism within 4 weeks. Sir, relapsing is within same organism within the 4 weeks.
Yes.
Recurrent is different organism within 4 weeks of the initial episode. And repeat peritonitis is peritonitis after 4 weeks.
Yes. And
refractory peritonitis is when, sir, there is no resolution of the cloudy effluent after 5 days of treatment with antibiotics.
Correct. So, right. So with appropriate antibiotics. So yes. What is the treatment for a refractory peritonitis or a fungal peritonitis?
Sir, a removal of the peritoneal dialysis catheter.
Correct. So you are not going to mess with the catheter anymore. So you will remove the catheter to save the peritoneum as well as to reduce the suffering of the patient. So when you remove the catheter, what are the things you would observe and what will you do in the future course of renal replacement therapy?
Sir, when we remove the catheter after the episode,
yes,
I would like to see whether if there was any tunnel infection, sir.
Yes. And what will be the antibiotic? Will you continue the antibiotics or stop the antimicrobials?
So antibiotics should be continued, sir, for 7 days.
At least for 7 days.
Yes.
And also observing the abdomen, peritoneal cavity, because in some, they may develop localized abscess. So you may require long-term antibiotic usage and drainage of the abscess. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah. Number 2, if it is fungal peritonitis,
fungal,
you would prolong the therapy to 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And
okay, sir. Yes, yes.
And then if it is tubercular peritonitis, we have reported repeatedly that you don't have to remove the catheter. You can continue the anti-tuberculous drugs and the tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis will resolve. How long will you treat the tuberculous peritonitis?
Sir, 9 months.
No, I think it should be more than that. It should be 12 to 18 months depending upon your geographical location. Okay, 9 months is not sufficient.
Okay, sir.
So never, because why I said that, previously some 1.5 decades ago, I was following that treatment only for 6 months or 9 months. I had 2 patients who had recurrence of tuberculous peritonitis. And then we had to treat it longer time.
Yes.
And what is one drug which ISPD recommends not to be used for anti-tuberculous treatment in patients with tuberculous peritonitis?
Pyrazinamide?
No. What produces changes in the eye? Retinal changes.
Ethambutol.
Yes. So ISPD guidelines says that ethambutol should not be used as a combination therapy in tuberculous peritonitis in children. So now I ask you another question. What will be the renal replacement therapy after removal of the catheter?
Sir, we have to give temporary hemodialysis. Sir.
Correct. Suppose, temporary hemodialysis, I agree, but we have to plan something for the future. How do you do that?
Sir, at least a 4 to 6 week gap should be given, sir, after removal of peritoneal dialysis catheter for this peritonitis.
Yeah, for reimplantation of a catheter. So if you are planning to do a reimplantation of the catheter, you wait for 4 to 6 weeks, 6 weeks in a fungal peritonitis and up to 4 weeks in a bacterial peritonitis.
Bacterial peritonitis.
Yes. So suppose and you find that you are going to be a bedside procedure. In some places they will reimplant the catheter by a bedside procedure. What are the dangers or what are the issues related to bedside catheter implantation after peritonitis in a patient on peritoneal dialysis?
Sir, there is a chance of rupture of the bladder, the bowel, or there is a chance of pre-peritoneal placement of the catheters.
No.
And
what sir is asking is,
yes,
what are the issues that you're likely to face after an episode of fungal or a peritonitis, and you want to reinsert the catheter? What is the best way you feel is you have to plan for a reinsertion in this child?
Ma'am, the best is to wait for 4 to 6 weeks. If we reimplant it before that, there is a chance that there will be reinfection with the same organ.
True. So now, after 6 weeks, what are the problems you're likely to face? Can there be any changes in the peritoneum?
Yes, ma'am. There is a chance that there will be inflammation of the peritoneum.
Generally, during a peritonitis, what sort of transporters do these people become? Both adults and children?
They become high transporter, ma'am.
Okay.
So
now
there will
after
be
an episode of peritonitis after
okay.
6 weeks.
Okay.
Which method would you prefer in reinserting the catheter technique? What are the techniques of PD catheter insertion?
Ma'am, open surgical, laparoscopic,
yeah,
and the bedside, ma'am, with Seldinger technique.
That is a percutaneous insertion.
Percutaneous,
so among these three, which is your option?
Laparoscopic.
Why?
It has been shown to have better results than other methods of insertion.
So basically, there can be a lot of adhesions when you open up the peritoneum. So if you just do a blind procedure, it is possible that the catheter won't be placed in the correct manner. Two, after you start the peritoneal dialysis, after you inserting the catheter, you may not have any ultrafiltration. So there is a high chance of ultrafiltration failure. Can you define ultrafiltration failure?
Ultrafiltration failure is defined as ultrafiltration volume less than 400 ml after modified PET test using 4.25% dextrose solution with a dwell time of 4 hours. After exclusion of pericatheter leak and pericatheter leak and
pericatheter leak and pleuroperitoneal communication or yes, there is communication to the pelvic or organs like the scrotum or retroperitoneal leak or subcutaneous leaks.
Yes. And
I have a small question in your history. You said that the child received platelet transfusions.
Yes.
So is a platelet transfusion advisable in the case of HUS? The platelet is generally low, but do we generally give platelets?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Why?
We don't give. Because there is consumption of the platelets.
Okay. And also the risk of thrombosis is quite high when you start transfusing platelets. And one more thing you said was the growth hormone. Now this child is being planned for a transplant. So how far before do you want to give the growth hormone? Secondly, what are the absolute contraindications which we will exclude before giving growth hormone therapy in a child?
Absolute contraindications, ma'am, include presence of a malignancy. Then uncontrolled diabetes, and if patient has diabetes, and the epiphysis should be open, ma'am. It should be not given during puberty. It should be given in pre-pubertal period.
So I think you should read all the indications and contraindications for GH therapy. They ask it quite often in exams also. And one more thing is, in this child, you said that he went on peritoneal dialysis. Now you talked about the bedside insertion of a catheter. Can you briefly tell us the steps on how you would, what all you will do for inserting a bedside PD catheter?
Ma'am, the preparation involves clearing the bowel, ma'am, on the day prior to the surgery, with some kind of enema. We have to clean the area with some chlorhexidine
So do you
or
want
something.
to give any antibiotics?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. We give one prophylactic. Give some prophylactic.
What is the recommended antibiotic? Because it is gram-positive organism from the skin which can lead to early infection. So, what is the recommended antibiotic?
So, vancomycin.
Oh,
vancomycin. Vancomycin.
Right.
Sir, then we'll have to end.
Mapping of the catheter before you start the insertion.
Yes, ma'am.
You want to implant the catheter, that is the point of exit site and the point of where the catheter should enter the peritoneum. That's what Dr. Rajiva is asking you.
Yes, ma'am. There are some PD catheters which gives stencil-based mapping.
Stencil-based mapping, we generally, like, you can just do a normal mapping. In which position do you want to do the mapping firstly? Sitting, standing, or lying down?
Lying down.
No, standing. Because, you know, the child is moving around. So you should be always make the patient to stand up, look for hernial orifices and look for any hernias, and then do the mapping, because the exit site should be visible to the patient or to the relatives very clearly, because some may have very fatty abdomen, and when you have an exit site which is underneath the skin or crevices, it will not be observed. So standing up is the best position to map or to mark the areas where the catheter exit should be and the entry into the peritoneal cavity.
Okay, so.
If you find a hernia, what do you do?
Sorry, ma'am.
If the child has an inguinal hernia,
we'll have to correct the hernia.
Okay, so you will correct the hernia, and what are the precautions you take once there is a hernia in this child?
Precautions for
PD.
If the child has a hernia, suppose the child has, you know, ventral hernias are common in adults, female with so what would you do if you see an inguinal hernia at the time of catheter implantation?
Ma'am, while we can after insertion of the catheter, we should wait, ma'am, for 4 to 6 weeks before starting the PD ideally. Then minimal
hernia during the time of catheter insertion.
Yes, ma'am. If laparoscopic insertion or open surgery insertion has been surgically.
Can we use a mesh or no? This is not about children. Generally, can we use a mesh for hernia repair in patients undergoing PD?
I'm not aware, ma'am.
Yes, mesh repair.
You can use.
Yes, you can use it. You should go back. Mesh can be used if they have hernias which the surgeon thinks cannot be opened by stitching up. So a mesh can be used for hernia repair in peritoneal dialysis patients.
Okay.
If you want to start early, what you'll do? For example, the patient has no other line or anything. All the avascular access is not possible. Then, but you have repaired the hernia. What are your strategies to avoid a leak?
Ma'am, in this scenario, we'll use the minimum possible fill volume that can be used. Other thing is that we should ask the patient to do dialysis lying down, not walk around, ma'am, preferably.
Yeah, cycler can be used.
Yes, sir. CCPD can be used in this patient because most of the dialysis in that is done at night when the patient is day drive you can use.
Partha, now we are moving on to transplant in this particular child.
Yes, sir.
What is your opinion of proceeding with a transplant, grandmother being the donor? Grandmother to a grandchild who is 9 years old. What are the issues related to a transplantation?
Sir, with grandmother being donor, there is increased risk of a delayed graft function.
Yes,
and longevity of the graft will be less, sir, as compared to if parent or sibling is used as donor.
Right. Yes.
And other issue with this patient is that if he has a atypical HUS, there is a high chance of recurrence.
Yes. So what is the therapy for an atypical HUS? What are the treatment available?
Sir, eculizumab is the drug of choice.
Yes, yes.
But it is not available in India, so we use a plasma exchange.
Yes. So now the question is, when they did the genetic study, was there any incompatibility between the grandmother and the child?
Sir, grandmother genetic testing is awaited, sir. They're planning, sir. They're working up the grandmother before doing the genetic testing.
Right.
Can you tell me what are donor-specific antibodies, and how do you measure donor-specific antibodies in the lab?
Donor-specific antibodies, presence of preformed antibodies against the HLA antigen of the donor.
Okay.
Donor-specific antibody will be measured by a single antigen bead, ideally.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Or if it is not possible, we do by Luminex. Luminex or
yeah. What would be? Let me just ask
CDC.
you. What is MFI? What MFI would you think will be appropriate to go ahead with a transplant, or above what level you should be very cautious and do not do a transplantation?
MFI, sir, values vary, sir, according to center.
Yes.
But around 1200 to 1500, we don't consider, sir, above MFI above 1200.
So anything above 5000 is considered to be very significant.
Yeah.
So what are the types of cross-match that you know of?
CDC cross-match, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
What is it?
The complement-dependent cytotoxicity.
Okay.
And
how do you do the CDC cross-match?
CDC cross-match, we collect the. I'm just blanked out on that.
No problem. You have to kind of have a proper reading on how a CDC cross-match is done. It's very important because
yes, ma'am. I'm just.
Yes, ma'am. What are the other types? What are the methods to improve the CDC cross-match sensitivity?
Ma'am, we increase the incubation time.
Okay.
Or we use this increase the incubation time, or
so there are 3 ways of improving sensitivity that also you should read.
Yes, ma'am.
So what is the other type of cross match you know
of? Cross.
So one is the CDC cross match, which I think pretty much all over India we
are doing. Flow cytometry and the virtual cross match.
And the what is a virtual cross match?
Virtual cross match, ma'am, we identify the HLA antibodies in the patient and the donor HLA type, we cross match them against. We know the donor HLA type and we know the HLA antibodies present in the patient.
Correct.
So we compare them and decide whether there is.
Virtual cross matches when somebody is planned for a transplant.
Ma'am, it is mostly used in cadaveric transplant, so where the kidney needs to be carried, say, for a longer distance, and to reduce the ischemia time.
To put it short and clear, basically, if suppose I wanted a transplant and I was on a deceased donor list, you type all my antibodies, that is antibodies present in my blood.
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So once and my HLA typing is done. Now I have so many antibodies, and that gets kind of uploaded onto a system. When a deceased donor call comes, the deceased donor's HLA typing is done, and virtually, that is on a computer basis, it is cross-matched, saying that okay, this person already has antibodies against that donor. So which is why you wouldn't be offered a kidney itself in that scenario.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Now, what are the other types of antibodies you know of other than HLA antibodies?
Non-HLA antibodies are also there.
Yeah.
One of them is against angiotensin 1 receptor antibody. Then there are anti-endothelial antibodies.
Do you know of any newer techniques for increasing the sensitivity of the DSAs? So now we all have carry DACs. Are all DACs pathogenic?
No, ma'am.
So we may be having DACs, but they may not ever cause a injury to the graft, right? So
yes,
any improving the sensitivity of this? Have you heard of C1q fixing antibody?
Yes, ma'am. I have heard of it.
Yeah. So that is one of the, not still proven, but that's one more thing which you need to keep in mind to improve the sensitivity of these antibodies.
Ma'am, regarding the CDC, I just remember, ma'am, the other thing that we can do is add the anti-human immunoglobulin.
Yes. Anti-human immunoglobulin. Yes.
AG. Yeah.
Yes.
Are there, because we have gone into detail, and just to sum up, we talked about the initial diagnosis and the treatment given to that, and then renal replacement therapy, including peritoneal dialysis, peritonitis, then adequacy of dialysis, looking at. So I just want to completely, at last, adequacy is not a number. Adequacy is how well the child or the individual is doing. Numbers are different. So always look at the physical well-being of the child.
Clinical
parameters. Yes. So numbers are different, and adequacy, you should not look at numbers and talk about that.
Yes.
I have a few children.
Volume and blood pressure control, all these things.
Yes, blood pressure control also. So are there any other issues to be covered?
Sir, the examination, I'll just...
pardon?
Say the examination.
What?
He wants to talk about examination.
Yeah, about examination. Please, move on.
Yes, sir. On examination, a patient is conscious, cooperative, well-oriented to time, place, person. Pulse is 80 per minute, bilaterally equal, no radial or radiofemoral delay, normal in force volume tension. Sir, blood pressure is 100 by 70 millimeter of mercury in right arm supine position, confirmed in the left arm as well as the bilateral lower limb.
Right.
There is no pallor at present, no icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, lymphadenopathy or edema.
Right.
Weight is around, so weight is 18.5 kg and height is 115 centimeter,
right.
Which is less than third centile, sir, for this percentile for this child.
Yes.
Sir, secondary sexual characters are normal.
Right.
Joint for him, spine examination was normal. There was no evidence of any scoliosis.
Right.
Gait was normal and joint examination was also normal.
Right.
And per abdo examination, there is a peritoneal dialysis catheter in C2.
Right.
There is no evidence of any pericatheter leak, no evidence of induration around the catheter.
Right.
No redness, no discharge.
Yes.
Hernial sites are normal. And there is some PD fluid in situ.
Yes.
There is no tenderness, no organomegaly.
Right.
And bowel sounds are normal.
Right.
Other systemics are nothing significant, sir, I could find.
Fundus examination, because you are...
Yes, sir, fundus examination I've done, it is normal.
Okay.
No evidence of...
Right.
Final...
no cervical lymphadenopathy, significant cervical lymphadenopathy.
No, sir, no lymphadenopathy.
Right.
Sir, final diagnosis... Hello?
Yes, we are listening.
Yes, sir, patient is CKD stage 5D on peritoneal dialysis, 4 exchanges per day. Native kidney disease is thrombotic microangiopathy, likely atypical HUS. Currently asymptomatic with 2 previous episodes of peritonitis, being worked up for transplant.
Right. Now the nutrition is the only thing, what are the, especially being a child, what are the nutritional aspects you will look at, just on, just to complete the case presentation.
Yes, sir. The nutritional aspect I would like to look at are, sir, the calorie intake of the patient.
Yes.
Other thing is the protein intake.
Yes,
sir. And for him, sir, considering his weight and height are so less, sir, I would like to give 125% of the recommended dietary allowance for him, sir.
Right.
As per his age.
Yes.
And protein intake for him, for his age, will be around, sir, 2 to 2.5 gram per kg.
Yes. Yes.
And as sir, as you said,
is hemoglobin, what level of hemoglobin you want to keep him at?
Sir, between 11 to 12.
Okay. Right. And what about this parathyroid hormone? Even though, people may look at that, what do you want this parathyroid hormone to be?
Sir, as per KDIGO recommendation, PTH level should be between 2 to 9 times of upper level of normal.
Right. Sure. And then the blood pressure control is at 100 by 60. So
blood
that's
pressure
very good.
is okay,
Yeah.
sir. The mother is checking at home.
Yes.
She says that it's okay.
Regarding the cardiovascular system, because cardiovascular mortality is the most common. So has the child had an echocardiogram done and looked at the cardiac function?
He's being worked up for transplant, sir. So they were going to do the echos.
Yes.
Not done when I.
Right. Anything else, Rajiva?
So once the child you have planned for a transplant,
yes,
what is your strategy with the PD catheter now?
Ma'am, if there is immediate on-table, if there is immediate on-table urine output, sometimes it is recommended that we can remove the PD catheter, but ideally it should be kept in place till the kidney function is established now.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the future fear when somebody is on PD for a very long time and they get a transplant?
Yes, ma'am.
What is
non-infective complication which can occur in patients who are on long-term peritoneal dialysis?
Encapsulating peritoneal sclerosis, EPS.
We had a few patients from India, especially children. I had a child who developed that.
Okay.
Yes. So is there any strategy to prevent that?
Sir, no, sir. Only avoid the abdominal infections, nothing else.
The infection, and the other thing I was just thinking, whether you use a more biological fluid rather than dextrose.
Okay.
Other biologically more friendly fluid available with
yes, sir.
higher pH and also non-dextrose containing fluids.
Yes, two-bag system.
Don't know that in the long run whether they would protect their peritoneum.
Yes. Tamoxifen and steroids have been also used actually. Though these patients are on steroids, yet patients who are on PD developing EPS is not very uncommon. So tamoxifen is one of the drugs, antifibrotic drugs, which has been tried actually in
is the tamoxifen used after the patient develops EPS or for prevention of EPS?
Not prevention. This is for treatment.
If they develop, so because EPS treatment is both surgical and medical.
Okay.
Because surgical is also equally important.
Yes.
I think we covered most of the things. And are there any questions from other people? Partha, can we go over and see that whether anybody has any questions or concerns, or anybody wants to discuss any further issues with this child?
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sir, regarding the ATP.
Can you identify yourself? Can you identify?
Sir, I'm Dr. Manoj Kumar from Madras.
Yes.
In this child, let's assume he has atypical HUS with a mutation in the alternate complement pathway.
Yes.
So, and there is he will definitely run a risk of 85% to 90% risk of graft loss post-transplant.
Yes.
Do you recommend going ahead with the simultaneous liver-kidney transplant or kidney-only transplant in such situations?
Yeah, complement H. See, what do you think, Rajiva?
So ideally, yes, we need to actually give it with eculizumab. There's a very, very high risk of getting a recurrence. But yeah, there have been studies which have shown that you can do liver-kidney transplant in a case of atypical HUS. I haven't personally seen one.
Yeah, I haven't seen myself also. So my knowledge on that is limited.
Okay, sir, and one more question. What is the significance of asymptomatic mutation, complement mutations detected serendipitously in prospective donors? Does it have any bearing?
Can you say that again, Bidin? Can you be a little more louder, please?
Yes, sir. What is the significance of incidentally detected complement gene mutations in prospective donors?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, in this particular case, if we're talking about, I wouldn't be too worried in this lady because she's 65 years old and someone who has not presented with anything, I would actually go ahead if I had other things in place. But yes, younger people, I wouldn't actually go ahead and take the kidney because there is a chance that if any, so see, at some point, if there is some sort of a stimulus for getting a HUS, if they have a complement factor like mutation, there is a chance that they can develop a HUS. And if I have found it, I wouldn't go ahead and take a kidney from a younger person.
Ma'am, what
I think a grandmother who's 65 years old, even if you found a mutation which was thing, and she has not yet presented with anything, because once you do a surgery itself can be a stress for developing HUS actually.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I would be careful, especially younger people, and I don't know whether I would actually, I mean, of course, these are familial mutations. You will have to do a genetic study. If I did find, if suppose you had a brother, I wouldn't take it.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I just wanted to know, Manoj here, sir.
Yes,
Sir,
Manoj, tell me.
I wanted to know, if you don't know the native kidney disease, especially in a child,
Yes.
so what should be your approach doing a transplant? Do you recommend genetic testing in all children undergoing transplant where native kidney disease is not known, or where biopsy is not being done?
See, a lot of the children when they present, this child is exceptional in that we were able to make a histological diagnosis. But many of the children who present, we do not know the etiology of the glomerulonephritis. So we go ahead with the transplant because, you know, I had FSGS recurring within 1 year of transplant. So especially with this revealing of these complement deficiencies, you know, I think that I would suggest, if it is a precious child and if you are doing a transplant, probably we can detect the genetic abnormalities in our country itself. We should go ahead and do that because that will add value to our treatment. Hello. Hello.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, just one question, sir. Parth.
Yes.
Sir, that if we remove the peritoneal dialysis catheter, sir, for infection, say refractory peritonitis,
yes,
what site should we reinsert the catheter?
No, that's what I said. If you are doing with a laparoscopy, you don't have to worry, because
Okay,
by performing a laparoscopy, you will see whether there is any scarring there. So once the catheter has been removed and you have waited enough time, and usually the foreign body removal itself will cure the infection along with the antibiotics. So you don't have to worry. You have to go to the other side or different location. The location of the catheter should always be, exit site should be seeable, and the patient should be comfortable with the exit site. It should not be at the belt level line. It should be either above or below the belt level line.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you.
Partha, you did an excellent job. You know, you are the pride of our country, man.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You know, all of you are, you know, because I feel that our nephrologists are well read, both in adult and pediatric nephrologists, and they learn a lot. And I wish you all the best because you are the future of the country to take things forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
So I would like to thank Manoj, my student, you know, for getting me involved in this discussion and learning a lot from you, and for the clarity of the presentation and the detailed workup of the child. And also I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Rajiva Yojana Parthasarthi and nephropathologist Dr. Priyanka, who has come forward to support me in discussing and interacting with you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.